Welcome back, everybody, to Sermon on the Mount series. Here we are in week 2 of the Sermon on the Mount. And this week, we get to really center in, zero in on just 4 verses that Jesus gives us in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5, verses 13, 14, 15, and 16. In these 4 verses, Jesus lays out a couple big statements, big things that I know are very important for a number of people. Maybe are some people's, I know, life verses or identity verses, and that's what they really are. These verses that Jesus gives us mark out what our identity is as disciples of Christ, as disciples of Jesus. Now, what's really cool is that Jesus is going to use salt and light. Jesus is going to use easy, relatable concepts that we can understand. And it should teach us, really, to start with, that whenever we're talking to other people about what it looks like to follow Jesus, that we should speak in easy, relatable concepts so that they can get it, because Jesus did the same thing with us, so that we might know what it looks like to follow Him. So, here we go. Jesus is going to give us an identity as His followers in these verses, and He's going to start by saying, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. And then He says, if salt loses its saltiness, it can't be made salty again. It's good for nothing except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Man, what is Jesus saying about what it means to be salt here? Well, you have to understand that salt in Jesus' day and age, even though it gives flavor a lot of times to our food, salt was used primarily there to prevent decay of food, of meat, of different things like that. They didn't have a refrigerator, they had salt. And so salt prevented decay for food. For us, what we have to understand is that being salty means Christians keep the world from decay. Salty means that Christians keep the world from decay. There's a lot of despair in today's world. There's a lot of people that get bent out of shape about what's going on in our world. And as Christians, we're called to bring hope. We're called to bring goodness. We're called to bring a different way, a better way. We're called to prevent decay. Now, when I say prevent decay, that doesn't just mean that we become Christians that are stuffy, that we don't engage with the world because we're going to bunker down and prevent decay by preventing ourselves from being affected by the world. No, preventing decay actually means that we're called into the world. We're called into the world to bring a wholly different way than the world knows, a better way, the way of Jesus, a way that people can see. And so that's the second point here, that you can start being salty actually by standing out. You can start being salty by standing out. In Romans, Paul is encouraging the church in Rome, and he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God that brings salvation for everyone who believes." Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of Jesus' way. In the same way, to be a little bit salty, we have to realize we're not called to hide. We're called to go out into the world to bring a different way, a better way, to put our necks on the line, to claim our identity as Jesus' followers that are different, and then live in that distinct difference. And really, we lose our saltiness when we don't speak out. We lose our saltiness when we don't speak out. Here again, if all we're doing is speaking to one another as Christians, we're not engaging in speaking into the world and bringing life and hope and goodness and purity. We're called to speak out. There's an active component here to faith. Just as peace was active in the Beatitudes, we're called to be active in preventing decay. We're called to call out injustice as well as immorality. Yes, we can tell the world sometimes when it's living in wrong ways, but we're definitely also called to call out injustice when we see people not being treated in the image of God. We're called to stand up, to speak out, to prevent decay in our world. Now, Jesus continues in the next verse, and he says, you are the light of the world. Speaking to this crowd, he says, you are the light of the world. Now, that's a big time thing. It's a big time thing, and here's why. Because the light of the world is the title for Jesus and Christians. That's your next fill in the blank. The title of light of the world is for Jesus and Christians. In John 8, verse 12, Jesus says these words. He says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. And now, as Jesus' followers, as Christians, we are called the light of the world. And Christians, really, all that means is to be little Christ, to be sort of Jesus in a sense. We're given the same title as Jesus because we should look like Jesus, live like Jesus, act like Jesus, love like Jesus. To be the light of the world means that we pick up the mantle of Jesus' identity as the light of the world, claim it for ourselves, and live the way Jesus did. Now, besides living like Jesus, being the light of the world also means something very crucial. Being the light of the world means you agree to be an evangelist. Being a light means we agree to be an evangelist. Jesus continues on here, and he says, a town built on a hill can't be hidden. And people, when they light a lamp, they don't put it under a bowl. They put it on a stand so that it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, Jesus says, you should let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. We don't hide the light, but be the light of the world. We let it shine. We spread it. We tell others. I love this children's kind of hymn. It says, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. I love that line because I think that's exactly what Jesus is saying. You're the light of the world. I'm going to let it shine. I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to let it shine. We speak into other lives. We bring hope, and we bring the good news of Jesus. And how do we bring the good news of Jesus? Well, we realize that where does light shine brightest? If you've ever been in a plane when it's at night and you look down on the earth below, you're able to see light, even lights 30,000 feet below you. Why? Because light is able to shine when it's darkest out. Light shines in the darkest places. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we in places surrounded by light, or are we bringing our light into the darkness? You know, if there's just a lot of light all in the same room, it just gets brilliantly light, and it's just an echo chamber. It's just a bubble. But really, light shines the brightest and brings the most hope when it enters into the darkness. Darkness is where light shines brightest. We're called to bring that little light of mine and let it shine in dark places. We're called to go out, to tell others, and to bring that hope. And so evangelism, it starts with action. It starts with action. Here again, I'm harping on it, but evangelism starts with action. Jesus says you don't put your light under a bowl, but you put it on a stand and you let it shine. It's a decision here. Jesus says you have to decide to put your light on a stand and to let it shine so that when people see you, they glorify God and they realize the good news of Jesus. We're called to speak up and to stand out and to be different. It's an active thing, and it's all about God's glory. That's the final point. Our motivation to do good, to shine light, to be salt, it's all God's glory. It's all God's glory. Our light, we don't shine our light to be attention seekers. That's not what it's about. We're called to bring light and to let it shine so other people, when they see us, they really see God and they glorify God. So there you have it. This week it's all about picking up and embracing our identity as Jesus' followers to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world that go out actively into the world to show people the good way of living like Jesus. I'll see you next week.